Why does the United States have so much poverty?
I've worked myself up from nothing to a state of extreme poverty. Now, what do you say?
Although the US has the highest gross domestic product, or GDP, in the world, it has more poverty than any other advanced democracy. It has more child poverty than any of the other Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, or OECD, countries such as Canada, the United Kingdom, Ireland, Sweden, and Norway. 1 in 9 Americans live in poverty, totaling over 38 million Americans who can't afford basic necessities such as food and shelter. How do we know this? Well, we have the official poverty measure, also known as the poverty line. The poverty line was created by Molly Orshansky, an American economist who created the Orshansky poverty thresholds in the early 1960s. Orshansky answered the question of who should be considered poor. She believed that being in a state of poverty meant that you didn't have enough money to sustain the absolute basics of a human life. Basically, you don't have enough money for food. So what she did is that she looked at the cost of food in a certain year and the amount of money, the share of a total income that a family was spending on food. And if they were spending more than a third of their income on food, that would mean that they were poor. For example, in 2024, the federal poverty line was $15,060 for a single person and $31,200 a year for a family of 4. Mathematically speaking, given the cost of food in 2024, if you were making $15,060 as a single person in a year, that meant that you were spending more than a third of your income on food and foregoing other necessities. Mind you, this number is calculated looking at the bare minimum nutritional requirements. So you're not shopping at Whole Foods, okay? This isn't Erewhon. This isn't luxury grocery shopping. No, it's the bare bones.
Now, when you were starting out as a writer, you were a black, impoverished homosexual. You must have said to yourself, gee, how disadvantaged can I get?
Oh, no, I thought I hit the jackpot.
Oh, great.
Unsurprisingly, poverty is not the great equalizer. It's context dependent. Overall, it's better to be a white poor than a black poor. In his 2023 book, Poverty by America, sociologist Matthew Desmond writes, Black and Hispanic Americans are twice as likely to be poor compared to white Americans, owing not only to the country's racial legacies, but also to present-day discrimination. The black unemployment rate remains nearly double the white unemployment rate, and studies have shown that black job seekers are just as likely to face discrimination in the labor market today as they were 30 years ago. Quick history lesson, because it feels like some people need a refresher. The United States was built on slavery. It was built on slave labor. This continued for hundreds of years of black people's labor turning into profit, none of which they were able to keep themselves. And all the while, white slave owners became richer and richer because of their slaves' labor, and the country became richer and richer because of it as well. Then the whole thing blew up, culminating in the Civil War and the failure of Reconstruction. The slaves were never compensated. However, the slave owners were, in fact, compensated for their lost property. Slaves were promised 40 acres and a mule, a promise that never came to fruition. Now, the descendants of those slaves are still in the United States today, and they are still poorer than their white counterparts due to the aforementioned centuries of systemic oppression. Some people believe that black people are poorer than their white counterparts because black people are inherently lazier. Those people they're very racist. They're simply quite racist. We'll get back to that later. With this whole conversation about DEI, I really wish that every time that the Republicans said DEI, they had to say the entire thing. They had to say diversity, equity, and inclusion, because it sounds worse to say I'm against diversity, equity, and inclusion than it does to say I'm against DEI. It's very unfortunate that it was able to be shortened. But it really has nothing to do with work ethic. Desmond writes, "The average white household headed by someone with a high school diploma has more wealth than the average black household headed by someone with a college degree." This quote exemplifies exactly what is wrong with the conversation surrounding DEI, or diversity, equity, and inclusion, in today's zeitgeist. Donald Trump, Elon Musk, and the rest of their loser cronies are trying to convince people that Black people are getting jobs they don't deserve. They're becoming pilots. They're becoming lawyers, and all off the backs of twisted affirmative action, taking jobs away from people who really deserve it. Won't somebody think of the white people? Of course, this narrative, like everything else the Supreme Leader says, is demonstrably false. For the anti-DEI crusaders, I have a question for you. Why is it that the average white household headed by someone who only has a high school diploma has more wealth than the average black household headed by someone with a college degree? On paper, having a college degree is a credential that makes you more desirable in the job market. We would say that someone who has a college degree for certain roles is more qualified. Education can be a credential that makes people more qualified for certain roles. However, as the facts reflect, even when Black individuals are more qualified, they're still likely to be poorer than the average white individual. What's the explanation? Quickly! What's the explanation? And that's where we get to the Black people are just lazier. We'll get to it. Because obviously, right, these people are never going to say the reason for that discrepancy is because of slavery. Because then they would have to acknowledge the impact of slavery, and then after acknowledging the impact of slavery, they would have to actually want to do something about it because they believe in the land of the free and the opportunity for everyone, and etc. But they don't want to acknowledge the impact of slavery. So they need to come up with another reason why it is that even when Black people have these educational qualifiers, they're still more likely to be poorer than their white counterparts who do not have the education and the qualifications. Of course, this entire logic is based in fact, whereas a lot of these people are basing their opinions in emotion. They are genuinely racist. They see Black people in high places and they say, it's not fair. It's not fair! This is the backlash to the Obama era. So many white people saw Obama, a Black man in the highest office in the land, and they said, this won't do. This just won't do. You know what they say? 1 step forward, 2 steps back. And honestly, the way that you know that Trump actually doesn't give a fuck about DEI and fairness is because Trump himself doesn't have any credentials to be in the highest office of the land. Okay? His only credential is that he has been president before. The first time that he became president, he didn't have one credential. He didn't serve as governor, not governor or mayor, did not have a law degree, did not serve on the Supreme Court, did not serve as a diplomat. He did not serve in the government, at any level of government. So it's giving, now the talking cheese is gonna preach to us.
Oh, so now the talking cheese is gonna preach to us.
No. You, and then look at the kinds of people that Trump is filling his cabinet with. I'm looking at you, Pete Hegseth. Bitches that are drunk on the job, and they want us to believe that they care about credentials. Okay. Anti-vaxxers in the Department of Health, and they want us to believe that they care about credentials. It was never about credentials. Trump doesn't have any credentials, and that never stopped him. The thing about Trump and his ilk is that the conversation on the outside, they're making it as if it's about credentials, but actually the conversation is about the fact that they do not believe that anybody in this country who is not a straight, white, land-owning male, you could say capital-owning male now, deserves to be a citizen and equally represented. They want to bring us back to 1789. So they don't like that all of us undesirables are taking positions that they feel are their birthright. Because according to them, this is their country and nobody else's. So why is there so much poverty in the United States? Is it the immigrants? No. No, it's not. It's not the... No. Mm-mm. No. Desmond writes, "The best research that we have on this question finds that the long-term impact of immigration on wages is quite small, and its impact on employment is even smaller. The thing is that immigrants tend to compete with other immigrants for jobs, not with native-born Americans." And when I say native-born, I mean they were born in the United States. I don't mean that they're Native Americans. It's almost like immigrants have always done the jobs that Americans don't want to do. Immigrants, we get the job done. However, detractors might say that immigrants are leeching off of our welfare system, benefiting. However, detractors might say that immigrants are leeching off of our resources, benefiting from the welfare system while not paying anything in taxes. To that I say that the poorest immigrants are actually undocumented, which means that they literally cannot participate in the biggest public welfare programs like Medicare, food stamps, and Social Security. Desmond rightfully points out that over a typical lifetime, an immigrant will give more to the U.S. government than they will ever receive in federal welfare benefits. So what else could it be? What are other theories for why there's so much poverty in the United States?
A toast to the king's health.
There's mud in it.
There's food and a drink, little one. Never mind the taste.
How can men bear such poverty? Bear it? Look, they live within the very shadow of the Bastille. They have to bear it.
Is it the breakdown of marriage and the nuclear family? No. No. No, it's not. It's not. Since the 1970s, marriage rates have declined precipitously. They fell off a cliff. Okay, bitches don't want to get married anymore. I mean, bitches can't even afford to be married, let's be honest. Goons like J.D. Vance kick up a big fuss about how we need to promote traditional family values and return to a traditional family structure. You know, one man, one woman, 1.5 children, and a golden retriever. Well, you might say, well, you know, maybe he has a point. Maybe there's something to this because in the United States, single mothers are much more likely to be poor. That's not the case in other countries like Denmark or Italy, but it is the case in the United States. Do you know what Denmark and Italy have that the United States does not? Universal Pre-K, an initiative that J.D. Vance does not support, by the way. You can't make this shit up. Denmark and Italy both have paid family leave. I mean, it's a little bit ridiculous how wealthy politicians on the right are kicking up a fuss. Why doesn't anyone want to have children anymore? But then they're against policy that could make it easier and more affordable for people to have children. Make it make sense. It's expensive. Everything is expensive, but children are especially expensive. The childcare costs in this country are insane. People can't afford to have children. They can't afford engagement rings. You know that sound that's like, there's not gonna be a swimming pool, you dumb slut. There's not even gonna be a house.
There's not going to be a swimming pool, you stupid slut. There won't even be a house.
That's literally me, like, to these Republicans. It's crazy. It's like there's not gonna be increasing marriage rates. Increasing fertility rates? Are you guys crazy? In this economy? You think people want to have kids in this economy where childcare costs are out the roof, are through the roof, where people are paying an arm and a leg to even give birth in the hospital, okay? And then forget it if you want your kid to get education after high school. You're done. You're bankrupt. This is not an environment that is child-friendly. The United States is not a child-friendly country. And you know what else breaks up families? Mass incarceration, which we know the Republicans love. Put him in jail! Send him away! I mean, the conservatives, they love themselves some private prisons. Have to invest in those private prisons. That way, they can continue the age-old American tradition of profiting off of black labor. It is enshrined in our Constitution, after all. The 13th Amendment literally states that the only way that slavery is legal is if the person is incarcerated. For more on that, watch the documentary 13th. Taking a macro lens, there are many different factors which contribute to the amount of poverty that there is in the United States. Corporate greed is a big one. Yup. Private equity. The decline of union power. That's another. Yup. In the 1950s and 60s, about 1/3 of American workers were in a union. But worker protections have been chipped away decade after decade until now we barely have anything left. At the scene of the crime is, of course, Ronald Reagan, enemy of peace-loving people everywhere. In 1981, 13,000 air traffic controllers went on strike after negotiations with the Federal Aviation Administration went sour. Ronald Reagan's response? To fire them all. Simple. Simple, 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 easy. And that was some foreshadowing. That would become a more common response to strikes. The erosion of union power, and by extension, the erosion of labor power, led to a stagnation in wages. Globalization is a reason often given by conservatives to explain some amount of poverty in the United States. The story goes a little something like this. All of the manufacturing jobs that used to be in the United States, World War II, post-World War II, in manufacturing cities like Detroit, are now in China. It is true that our manufacturing is not done here. It is true that globalization has made it such that in places where labor is cheaper, like in China, because there's more labor and more factories, those jobs are gone. However, Desmond writes, we can't chalk up today's brutal job market to globalization and technical change. Economic forces are often the result of policy decisions, such as the 1994 North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, which made it easier for companies to move their factories to Mexico and contributed to the loss of hundreds of thousands of American jobs. Mind you, other countries are dealing with similar forces of globalization, but not all of them have experienced insane wage stagnation and economic inequality. You know what's highly correlated with wages? Union participation. Krusty Krab is unfair! Mr. Krabs is in there! Standing at the... Krusty Krab is unfair! Mr. Krabs is in there! Standing at the concession, plotting our oppression! Whoa! Krusty Krab is unfair! Hey! Mr. Krabs is in there! Whoa! Standing... Okay. Anyway.
Krusty Krab is unfair! Mr. Krabs is in there! Standing at the concession, plotting his oppression!
What the heck does that mean?
I don't know.
The rise of the gig economy and independent contractors further eroded worker power. Basically, instead of a company having to hire a full-time employee and pay them health insurance and benefits and all that jazz, they get somebody temporary through a staffing or temp agency. Desmond writes, as corporations have increasingly come to rely on independent contractors, they have depressed wages and hindered workers' ability to earn promotions.
Money, money, money!
Being poor is expensive, and corporations know that, and they gleefully profit off of the most vulnerable members of our society through exorbitant interest fees, late fees, and just generally charging poor people more. For example, let me ask you a question. Do you think that landlords in poor neighborhoods or landlords in rich neighborhoods make more money? Do 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 do. If you said landlords in poor neighborhoods, you're right! Landlords in poor neighborhoods make more money on average than their landlord counterparts in wealthy neighborhoods. Why? Because their expenses in poor neighborhoods, their mortgage, their taxes, are significantly lower, but the rents that they charge are only slightly lower. Another way the poor are forced to pay more is through the banks. The banking industry. Ugh. For example, some banks require that customers have a minimum balance, a minimum amount of money in your account. If you don't have, say, at least $500 in your account, boom, you're hit with a fee. Chase, for example, does not have a minimum balance, but they do have a monthly service fee of $12, which you cannot pay if you have at least $1,500 in your account at the beginning of each day. I mean, it's a poor tax. That's how it works. If you're poor and you don't have $1,500 in your checking, they get $12 from you. And what's interesting about it is that it's the exact opposite of what makes sense. Because if you don't have $1,500, you can't afford to be giving Chase $12 every month. It counts, the $12 count more for you than the guy who has over $1,500 in his account. This is just one way in which poor people are forced to pay more. And poverty is very cyclical as well. So, for example, take someone who is trying to buy boots for the winter, a nice pair of winter boots. They don't have enough money up front to invest in a pair of boots that will last them for 10 years. So what do? They buy a pair of boots for $50 that will last them 1 year, and then they'll have to rebuy boots next year. But somebody who has enough money to front the cost for good quality boots, overall, at the end of the day, they pay less because they don't have to keep buying boot after boot after boot. Someone financially stable can invest in one pair of good boots and have it for 10 years. And at the end of the day, they'll have spent less total. Racial terms do apply. From 1934 to 1968, banks didn't do business in poor black communities because the federal government refused to insure mortgages there. I wonder what kind of impact it would have on a group of people to be systematically excluded from one of the major means of building wealth in this country, which is home ownership. Waves of deregulation in the banking industry in the 1980s made the problem even worse. I'm looking at you, Ronald Reagan. Today, racial disparities in the banking sector persist. Desmond writes, a 2021 study found that middle-class black homeowners with incomes between $75,000 and $100,000 carried higher interest rates on their mortgages than white homeowners with incomes at or below $30,000. Don't get me wrong, it's not like the government has never tried anything to try to remedy this state of affairs. They gave it the old college try. It certainly doesn't help that the American public itself has very divided views on welfare. At least half of the country seems to believe that welfare makes people lazy. Ronald Reagan, who do you think pushed that agenda? Ronald Reagan! Ronald Reagan at the scene of the crime again! He complained over and over again about public housing where you can get an apartment with 11-foot ceilings, with a 20-foot balcony, a swimming pool, and a gymnasium. Of course, we also have the racially charged welfare queen stereotype, which Ronald Reagan did his fair share of heavy lifting to propagate. Remember when I said that some people just believe that black people are inherently lazier just by nature? I wasn't kidding. I wish I was. Desmond writes, "First, Americans tend to wrongly believe that most welfare recipients are black. This is true for both liberals and conservatives. Second, many Americans still believe blacks have a low work ethic. In 1972, social scientists conducted a survey of adults called the General Social Survey. In 1990, the survey asked Americans to rate how lazy or hardworking they thought different groups were based on a 7-point scale, with 7 representing the belief that almost everyone in the group is lazy. That year, 6% of Americans who cared to answer the question thought whites were generally lazy, giving them a score of 5, 6, or 7. But 44% of Americans reported feeling that same way about black Americans. The most recent iteration of the survey, conducted in 2021, found that more than 1 in 7 Americans still saw black Americans as lazy. Anti-black racism hardens Americans' antagonism towards social benefits. This is one of the saddest ironies in American history around the subject of social progress, because for a lot of white people, they do not care if they themselves are hurt as long as they perceive that blacks or other minorities are being hurt more. They would rather, instead of both groups being able to advance, they would rather not advance themselves as long as their disadvantage is still a greater advantage than the blacks' advantage. And this is the kind of logic that brought us Donald Trump, because for a lot of poor white people, they feel that they have been maligned, they feel like they have been slighted, they feel like they have been forgotten, and they feel like they have been forgotten. It's been at their expense, the progress that other minorities have made. The real shame is that we could improve society for both of us. There are things that would be able to help all Americans regardless of race, things like universal health care that these poor white people won't even advocate for. Because, you know, their mentality is basically as long as they're doing better than black people, they're chill. Doesn't matter. But you know what's really crazy is that it's the people who benefit the most from government assistance who are advocating for the eradication of the welfare state. Let me explain. There are different ways that you can receive help from the government. For example, one way is through direct cash assistance, through direct welfare. Uncle Sam can give you $20 and be like, here, this is yours, right? Another way that you can receive help from the government is Uncle Sam telling you, hey, pay me $20 less in taxes. Either way, you're making $20, right? Whether Uncle Sam gives you $20 or says, hey, you don't have to give me $20, you net made $20. When Uncle Sam says, you don't have to pay me $20 in cash, right? That is a tax break. When Uncle Sam gives you $20, we could say that that's direct welfare or cash assistance. Either way, both people are benefiting from government assistance. There are many ways that the government helps out Americans who are not below the poverty line. Child tax credits, homeowner subsidies, student loans and 529 college savings plans, government subsidized retirement benefits, etc. If you benefited from a federal loan to go to college, then you are a recipient of government assistance. You're a welfare recipient too, but we wouldn't describe it that way. A lot of people don't feel that way, even though they have student loans, federal student loans. In fact, the government spends more on these kinds of programs than it does on programs that are specifically targeted at low-income families. For example, in 2020, the federal government spent more than $193 billion on homeowner subsidies, which go to mostly white people with six-figure incomes, compared to only spending $53 billion on direct housing assistance for poor families. Psychologically speaking, human beings tend to feel losses more acutely than gains, which might explain why people who get tax breaks out the wazoo don't seem to view themselves as recipients of government assistance. Elon Musk is literally a welfare queen. Jeff Bezos is a welfare queen, okay? They get tax breaks that are worth billions. More money than the government is giving normal people like you and me, okay? They want you to be distracted from their wealth because they are the ones that are stealing from you, not your fellow working class people, not immigrants, not black people, the 1%. They're the ones that are taking your money so that they can buy their 67th private jet and their 3rd private island. Socialism for the rich or whatever. Desmond writes, those who benefit most from government largesse, generally white families with accountants, harbor the strongest anti-government sentiments. They lend their support to politicians who promise to cut government spending, knowing full well that it won't be their benefits that get the axe. Overwhelmingly, voters who claim the mortgage interest deduction are the very ones who oppose deeper investments in affordable housing, just as those who received employer-sponsored health insurance were the ones pushing to repeal the Affordable Care Act. It's funny because this is what the Republican Party is actually doing right now. They're like, we're going to reduce government spending by going after Medicare, by going after the little protections that we have for poor, sick Americans. Good job, guys. You did it. You saved the city.
Did it, Patrick. We saved the city.
De facto segregation continues in the United States. You can see that by looking at where people live. There is a housing shortage in the US. Furthermore, there is a lack of affordable housing. It definitely doesn't help that when there is the mere possibility of an affordable housing complex being built somewhere, white, mostly affluent residents come out of the woodworks to protest. Not in my backyard, they say. The funny thing is that most Americans actually support building public housing, just not in their neighborhoods. Zoning laws strengthen the de facto segregation. The New York Times writes, it is illegal on 75% of the residential land in many American cities to build anything other than a detached single-family home. And overwhelmingly, who can afford detached single-family homes? Remember, it's your money that is subsidizing tax cuts that are given to the wealthy. They are your social services that they're cutting. Another point that I thought was poignant that was made by Keds, the economist, who I really recommend that you guys go follow. She talks about economic policy and how the United States' best times economically are ahead of us if we choose the right policy. Something that she talks about is that poor people are not a permanent underclass of people who their dad was poor, their grandpa was poor, their great-grandpa was poor, and they're poor and they'll always be poor. Rather, poverty is a state of being, not like an inherent descriptor of someone. And I think that change in framework of how we think about it would really help most Americans understand that you are closer to being poor than you are to being Jeff Bezos. People go through different cycles where some months they're poor, some months they get out of poverty. It's like undulating. It's not like you have poor stamped on your head at birth and then it's over for you. A lot of Americans are at risk of being poor, or they have been poor within the last year, or they'll be poor in the next year at some point.
I wonder what the poor people are doing on a day like this.
The IRS needs to be on Bezos's ass. One way that we could actually take tangible steps to end poverty in the United States is by making rich people pay their taxes. The IRS now estimates that the United States loses more than $1 trillion a year in unpaid taxes, most of it owing to tax avoidance by multinational corporations and wealthy families. Why isn't Doge worried about this? I mean, this is government waste because we have all of this revenue that we could be generating from rich people's income. $1 trillion, guys. 1 trillion, poof, like this into the fire because rich people won't pay their taxes. Doge should be trying to enforce this tax collection as quickly as possible. And yet, it's almost like Elon Musk doesn't give a fuck about generating revenue, and he doesn't give a fuck about excess and waste, and it was never about that. Never. The income inequality in the US is disgusting, it's repulsive, and it's inextricably linked with the amount of poverty that there is in this country. Where do you think they get the money from? They get the money from your wage. From committing wage theft, okay? That's how they get the money. Wage theft, exploitation, not paying good wages, not paying healthcare. That's how they get the money. Just as like a quick aside, what has happened to the concert ticket industry because of Ticketmaster and Live Nation and the monopoly they have? When we think about the connection between poverty and wealth, that one man's wealth is another man's poverty, look at the fact that regular people who are buying concert tickets are foregoing to pay necessities so that they can buy tickets that are $300, $400, $500 because of Ticketmaster's greed. And where is their money going? Yes, 300, 400, maybe it doesn't seem like a lot, but it's millions of people. Millions of people who are a part of the underclass who are giving the overlords that money. Those fees, those whatever, they charge like crazy. And that goes straight into their pocket. Yup. And are the workers seeing that? Do the workers have great wages? Do the workers at Ticketmaster and Live Nation, are the stadiums seeing that? Probably not. Probably not. The tax loopholes need to be closed. Studies have shown that regular Americans pay 90% of what they owe in taxes, while the ultra-wealthy only pay 75%. They need to pay their fair share. They need to pay their fair share. But listen, it's not just the ultra-wealthy that are benefiting from this state of affairs. From this system of exploitation. It's not just the ultra-wealthy that are benefiting. When you buy from Amazon and you're able to get super cheap products the next day because of the way that they exploit their workers, you are also benefiting from keeping people in poverty. When you invest in the stock market, and whether it be through a Roth IRA or index funds, a share of the profits that these companies are reaping from exploiting their workers is going into your pocket. I am not saying don't invest in the stock market. I'm saying that you can reduce the amount of harm that you do by being conscious of how a company treats its workers. If a company treats its workers, especially like shit, like Amazon does, don't shop there. The same way that people don't shop at places because of their carbon imprint, because of how they treat black workers, because of racism scandals, we should also not shop in places who do not treat their workers with dignity. Places that have low wages and histories of exploitation. Places that union bust, like Amazon does. And I know some bitch is gonna be like, no ethical consumption under capitalism. Don't you know ethical consumption under capitalism me, okay? Because listen, no ethical consumption under capitalism doesn't mean that you're absolved of any responsibility of what you as a consumer choose to participate in. You have a certain level of agency. Use it. Use it to say fuck you to companies who already don't give a shit about you, right? And they don't care about their workers. There are levels to this shit. There is a direct correlation between how many tax breaks the rich receive and how much funding goes into public investment. Would you like to have public transportation? Would you like to have public fountains, public art? Me too! Would you like to have free breakfast for children? Free lunch? After school care, maybe? We know that our supreme leader, Donald Trump, is a huge proponent of tax breaks. In fact, the tax breaks that he has already implemented, that he implemented in his first term, are expiring this year, and the Republicans are scrambling, trying to find the money so that they can put the tax breaks again. And so that the rich can get even richer. Why not? Hey, the Republicans are looking for the money to give these billionaires these tax cuts. So what are they looking at? Social Security, USAID. We are literally taking money from poor people in developing countries, money from people for water programs, for women's education, from countries that we helped destroy to give to Bezos, Musk, and Zuckerberg. We have some of the richest people in the world plotting to take away from people who have nothing. That's the state of affairs. And you know what else? It's estimated that the Trump tax cuts, which passed previously, will reduce public investment by an estimated $1.9 trillion by 2027. You can't make this shit up. Can you imagine what $1.9 trillion would do if we invested it into the public safety net? What $1.9 trillion could do for children? We have the highest levels of child poverty amongst developing nations. But we're giving $1.9 trillion. I have to calm down. I have to calm down. It's sick! It's sick and it's twisted! I'll leave you with this. Poverty is not fate. It is a condition. It is not a misfortune. It is an injustice. It is the result of social structures and mental and cultural categories. It is linked to the way in which society has been built in its various manifestations. Thank you for watching all the way to the end of my video. Please feel free to comment below. I want to hear, what do you think about the Trump tax cuts? Do you think that billionaires are ever going to pay their fair share of taxes? And do you think that poverty is an inherent condition or is a result of societal injustice? Sound off in the comments below. My name is Aisha, and this show, The Archive, is a show about books, politics, and history. And if that's your thing, consider subscribing. Here are other videos that I have posted on this channel that you can go watch, and I appreciate you spending some time with me. Goodbye. Let them eat cake.
That's such nonsense. I would never say that.